President Biden is going to be on the phone with President Putin Wednesday. And Rick Renell's going to be joining us tomorrow and Wednesday on this very issue because, of course, he's done a lot of work because of his being ambassador to Germany. A lot of these issues involving Russia relate right back to Germany, and now and even more so now with the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. So we've seen this Russian troops amass on Ukraine's borders yet again. This happened under the Obama administration. It was Crimea. It was annexed with little more than hands up in the air from the world and a condemnation. But yet that battle has continued on. Live firefights have continued on since the Obama years. And now Putin is amassing 175,000 troops, basically surrounding Ukraine's land borders, and has made a threat to the United States that I'm going in unless you sign an agreement, which I'm not even sure the president has the authority to do, but you'd have to sign an agreement that you will never allow Ukraine to become a member of NATO. And
so he's trying to block the NATO alliance for extending to Ukraine.
Yeah.
So, Wes, Colonel Smith, what does that mean for the rest of NATO and for the rest of the world?
Well, Putin is a bully, and he perceives this as his time to act. I don't think he really, really wants to invade Ukraine, although it's likely he will, but he wants to put leverage on the United States and on NATO to back off. Because we've expanded NATO since the fall of the Soviet Union. He wants that to stop. But not only that, he's not only calling for some written guarantee that we will not expand NATO, as if the United States makes that call. The NATO alliance, they vote on who joins NATO. It's not just up to the United States. But he wants that assurance because we're influential. But not only that, he also wants in writing from President Biden that we will no longer do joint military exercises in Eastern Europe, and that we will not do joint military exercises with Ukraine and Georgia, as if President Putin gets to control the deployment of U.S. forces. But it is his attempt to bully. He perceives, I think, this is the time to act for a couple of reasons, Jay. One, he perceives Joe Biden as weak. Yep. He looks at what happened in Afghanistan, and he thinks he can get away with this. But also, because of President Biden's tacit approval of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, Putin also realizes that he hasn't Europe over a barrel, that they need his gas and oil, and he can cut it off at some point if we continue to go through with this. The good news, if Biden would take advantage of it, is that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline is not a done deal yet. Yeah. And we could yank our tacit approval of this and really punish Russia in that way. But in the meantime, Putin is a bully, and he probably, unless he gets his way, will invade Ukraine. And here's
let's stop there for a moment.
Yeah.
Okay, the ramifications of the Russian government authorizing their military, Andy, you were just in our European Center for Law and Justice offices, to authorize the invasion of Ukraine would be a monumental shift, not only in government, but in threat. I mean, it would increase the angst level. I've said that a couple of times today for the rest of Europe.
Well, of course it does, because, here's one sovereign state basically invading another sovereign state, which has been given autocephaly in terms of its church by the ecumenical patriarch, which means that the West has tacitly recognized the right of the Ukrainians not to be invaded, to have their own church separate from Moscow. This has angered Putin substantially as well. But think of the idea that the Russians are going to basically turn 175,000 troops on the Ukrainians, in addition, Jay, to the fact that there is basically a fifth column in the Ukraine of pro-Russian supporters who are going to be giving aid and comfort to that invasion plan if it ultimately occurs.
Yeah, it's not a clear-cut line of like all Ukrainians are opposed to Russia and Russia. So there's also the idea that internally, that you could put the pressure on the borders. You could also internally end up with a power change.
Yep.
And you put a different leader in there who might be pro-Kremlin, and it accomplishes effectively the same idea, or at least puts it on the path, because then they could start coming up with agreements to limit their authority and rejoin some kind of union with Russia.
So people need to understand that there actually is, as you just mentioned, Jordan, there is within Ukraine a populace that is very pro-Russian, because that's where they came from. That's their language. That's their a lot of it's their faith. So, Harry, you've got this unique internal struggle going on here which makes the whole Russia move even much more difficult globally.
I think that is true, and so that provides a strong incentive for Mr. Putin to invade, or at least to threaten to invade. It's important to keep in mind that America faces an unprecedented low point in U.S. and Russian relations. So the question really becomes, will the U.S. pursue sanctions if Russia invades? My view is as follows. Putin is looking for understanding in the domain of NATO, which actually means Putin is looking for Biden to cave. This bullying pattern in the face of fecklessness by the U.S. authorities is consistent with the Obama-Biden approach, which concentrates on never giving up an opportunity to surrender in exchange for what? A fig leaf.
You know, it is something, too. The idea that Ukraine was right on the edge of joining NATO, just to understand this, retired admiral, bite number 4.
Ukraine is already in what's called a membership action plan, which is kind of a pre-step toward eventually gaining full membership in NATO. So that train has left the station, if you will. What Putin is trying to do is scare the Ukrainians into essentially pulling back from that process, doing everything he can to intimidate them.
And the dangers of that we've talked about with Rick over and over again, the dangers of rewriting European borders. It can become, again, you can open that door and the door stays open, and you've got all these different, it could be ethnic, religious groups who have been able to live in peace since World War II to an extent that we saw the fall of the Soviet Union, and now we're starting to see. I mean, this hasn't been like a cold conflict. This has been an active conflict since the Obama years. Firefights have continued on. It's affecting people deep inside Ukraine, including in Kiev, and it's divided the nation. But it also then you can look at other these essentially former Soviet states, Central European countries as well, that start saying, well, we want to divide this too. We want to separate here out. And you can also start disrupting those who are already members of NATO and that entire alliance.
Well, already Putin is doing just that. Belarus is having a conflict on the border with Poland, which used to be part of the Soviet bloc. They now are a member of NATO. Yep. And so Putin is supporting Belarus because they objected to the EU sanctioning them because of their controversial, probably illegal presidential election last year. They were actually flying in asylum seekers from the Middle East to Minsk and then encourage them to cross the border into Poland. So Putin is a part of that as well. And here's the interesting thing about Vladimir Putin. He seeks to be a destabilizing influence in Europe, and he's succeeding at it. Right. He's already divided the U.S. and part of like Germany on the gas and oil issue. But right now, his foreign ministry office yesterday said that if they were to invade Ukraine, it would be defensive in nature, much like Hitler said when he invaded Poland in 1939, that somehow or another Russia's not the threat. He says Ukraine's the threat.
Well, it's interesting because I was just going to ask this, and that is, what is the impact of this kind of move on the rest of Europe, Andy? Because that is where you wonder that, because Putin is thinking this through. So what is the next play here?
Well, that's the question. What is the next play? Ukraine now. What's next? Romania? Are we going to restate the Warsaw Pact? Are we going to capture the Poles? Are we going to go into Slovakia and the Czech Republic? This is the apprehension that people fear of an expansive Putin policy and the intimidation that Admiral Stavridis spoke about. And that what is he going to do, and what is the United States going to do in response? So he's doing everything he can to intimidate the Ukrainians, and I think he may be succeeding in that intimidation.